You are done here, Elowen. Cormac Delvine, 44-year-old husband of Elowen Hartwell Delvine and chief executive of Delvine and Ashford Development Group, said it from the center of the front hall at Thornfield House, while his mother watched from the landing above like she had been waiting years to hear exactly those words. In his right hand was a sealed legal envelope. Beside him stood Honora Delvine, 68-year-old mother of Cormac and controlling trustee of the Delvine Family Residential Trust, which technically held the deed to every room they were standing in. She had Elowen's set of house keys already in her palm, not set on the hall table, not offered held, the way a person holds a small victory they have been anticipating for a long time. Sabine Lott, 33-year-old brand consultant for Delvine and Ashford Development Group, stood near the east archway with one hand resting against the wall. She wore a winter coat in a shade that matched the room's trim almost exactly, as though she had already measured herself into the space before anyone asked. Elowen Hartwell Delvine, 37-year-old wife of Cormac and daughter of the late August Hartwell, stood in the hall with one bag beside her feet. 10 years. She had given 10 years to this house, to this family, to the company that carried her husband's name on the side of every development permit from Ottawa to Hamilton. She had corrected contractor invoices before they became disputes. She had managed relationships with municipal planners when Cormac's ambition outpaced his patience. She had read loan agreements while he was at the golf course and flagged the covenant clauses that would have cost him 2 major projects. She had done all of this quietly, because that was how her father had taught her real work got done. Nobody in that hall thanked her for any of it. Sabine's voice came softly across the marble. Some arrangements simply run their course. Elowen looked at Cormac. She waited for something, a hesitation, a single sentence that would show he remembered what they had been before pride became his primary language. He said nothing. He looked at the legal envelope as though the paper itself were the most important person in the room. "Don't contest this," he said. "We'll keep it clean." Elowen picked up her bag. What Cormac did not know, what none of them knew, was that Elowen was the controlling beneficiary of the Hartwell Capital Trust, a private family trust established by her father before the marriage, structured through a blind trustee arrangement that listed her maiden name on every governing document. Through that trust, she held majority voting interest in Westmark Capital Inc., the private investment firm that had been financing Delvine and Ashford's largest construction projects for 6 years, the bridge loans, the construction credit lines, the equity participation agreements on 3 downtown development sites currently under permit review. All of it ran through Westmark. All of it, ultimately, answered to Elowen. Cormac had signed the premarital financial disclosure on a Tuesday 10 years earlier and called it paperwork. His lawyer had flagged the Hartwell Capital Trust by name. Cormac had skimmed the first page, laughed, and said, "Old money loves old documents." He signed without reading past page 2. He had never asked what the trust actually controlled. Elowen walked past him toward the front door, rain against the tall windows. She did not look at Sabine. She did not look at Honora. She looked at the framed photograph of August Hartwell that she had insisted on hanging in the east corridor when she first moved in. A quiet man in a grey suit who had once told her that the most dangerous thing a woman could do was allow ambition to be mistaken for decoration. The door closed behind her. In her coat pocket, her phone buzzed. She did not look at it yet. She stood on the front step and let the rain come down on the shoulders of her jacket, and breathed once, the way her father had taught her to breathe when something important was about to begin. 6 weeks before Cormac handed her a legal envelope, Elowen had arrived at the Delvine and Ashford offices before 7 in the morning, carrying a folder of amended site cost projections that nobody had asked her to review. She was not an employee of the company. She was a wife. That was how Cormac introduced her at investor dinners and how Honora described her to friends in the neighborhood. Cormac's wife, never by her own name, never with any acknowledgement that the woman who managed relationships with half the subcontractors quietly covered salary shortfalls during 2 painful quarters and reviewed zoning documents, while Cormac took calls, had contributed anything of consequence to the business that carried his name. In the building lobby that morning, Oswin Pratt, 62-year-old estate manager of Thornfield House, who was also delivering maintenance contracts to the company office, looked up from the front desk. "You should be at home, Mrs. Delvine," he said. "The numbers should be at home," she said, "but they followed me here." He gave her the small, knowing smile of a man who understood more than he let on. At the finance desk, Elowen found Nessa Arlo, 26-year-old junior analyst at Delvine and Ashford, sitting in front of her screen with the careful stillness of someone trying very hard not to cry in a professional setting. Elowen set a coffee beside the keyboard. "Subcontractor invoices 30 days behind again?" she asked. Nessa looked at her. Mr. Delvine said Q3 was stabilized. "Q3 was managed," Elowen said. "That is a different thing." She showed Nessa how to route the outstanding payments through a supplier continuity fund. She had arranged through her own accounts the previous year, coded properly, documented cleanly, in a way that allowed Cormac to stand before investors and speak about operational strength without technically lying. Elowen had spent years doing this, keeping the floor from giving way while someone else stood on it and called himself a builder. On her way out, she passed the boardroom where Reeve Callender, 49-year-old chief financial officer of Delvine and Ashford, and the most visibly stressed person in the building that morning, was closing the window blinds. Through the glass, she could see Cormac with a folder bearing the Westmark capital letterhead. His jaw was tight. Reeve was speaking too quickly. Elowen noted it. She kept walking. Her private phone rang in the car. The caller ID read, "Adele Ferris, Westmark Capital." Adele Ferris, 43-year-old chief risk officer of Westmark Capital Inc., and one of the few executives who knew the full structure of the Hartwell Capital Trust, did not call before business hours unless something had shifted from concern to emergency. "I know you asked us to maintain separation from any file connected to your husband's company," Adele said, "but the Delvine and Ashford exposure has entered territory we need to address." Elowen looked through the windshield at the grey morning street. "What kind of territory?" "Covenant breach, valuation irregularities on the collateral schedule, and a personal guarantee renewal that appears to carry additional signatories." A pause. "Including yours." Elowen went completely still. "I will call you from a secure line," she said. The evening at Thornfield House 3 weeks later was arranged as a celebration. A new project partnership, a curated guest list of investors and municipal contacts, and the kind of people who decided which names appeared on development shortlists. Elowen arrived early to arrange the table. She found her place card near the kitchen service passage. She stood holding the card with the evening light falling long across the main table. Polished silver, good crystal, the warmth of money trying to look effortless. Her regular seat had been given to Sabine, whose name card sat 3 chairs from Cormac's left, close enough to be intimate without making it obvious to anyone who chose not to look closely. Honora came through the hallway with a glass in her hand and looked at Elowen and then at the card. "Our guests tonight are here for business," Honora said. "Not sentiment." She moved past. "Sit somewhere useful." The words were delivered pleasantly. That was what made them land. Sabine arrived with 2 assistants and a printed presentation about the company's new visual direction. She greeted Cormac with her hand on his sleeve and held it there a beat longer than introduction required. "Mrs. Delvine," Sabine said, finding Elowen near the sideboard. "I have heard so much about your patients." Elowen looked at her steadily. "Then you have heard very little." She turned back to the wine glasses she had been arranging. Later, while guests moved through the main rooms, Melina, 57-year-old head housekeeper at Thornfield House, who had worked there longer than Elowen's marriage, found her in the west corridor and held out a folded card between 2 fingers. Her expression was careful. "This was on Mr. Delvine's desk," Melina said, "in the private study." Elowen read it. Sabine's handwriting, words that assumed they would never be read by the wrong person. She folded the card and placed it in her inside pocket. "Thank you," she said quietly. Melina looked at the floor. "I wanted you to understand how long this has been arranged." The word arranged landed the way a key turns in a lock. Not a slip, not a weakness, a plan. That same evening, through a cracked library door, Elowen heard Cormac say to Reeve, "Westmark wants updated appraisals. Use the Haverford site numbers." Reeve's voice was strained. "We submitted those figures 18 months ago." "Submit them again at the revised Q4 rate." Elowen stood in the corridor with her hand flat against the wall. The Haverford site had already been pledged in a previous credit application. Submitting inflated figures on the same asset for a new facility was not creative accounting. It was fraud. She stepped back before they heard her. She did not sleep that night. The front door of Thornfield House closed on a Thursday evening in November. By Friday morning, a process server knocked on the door of the hotel room she had taken near the university. The envelope was thick. The first page read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Elowen sat at the small desk by the window and read every line. The settlement was clean on the surface and surgical in its damage. She was to waive all claims connected to the company's financial structure. She was to sign a non-disclosure agreement covering estate operations and business decisions she had participated in. She was to accept a transition payment and file no inquiry into any of the company's lender relationships. Near the bottom of page 4, she found it. Wife confirms that she holds no direct or indirect interest in any investment firm, lender or capital provider connected to Delvine and Ashford Development Group, and waives all right to request, contest or initiate review of any financial obligations connected to same. She read it a second time, then a third. They were not just asking her to leave. They were asking her to sign away the one thing they did not know she had. Her father had told her once, "A man who puts language he does not understand into a legal document is afraid of something he cannot name." This clause told her exactly what they feared. They feared the lender. They simply did not know the lender was her. She called Camille Roux. Camille Roux, 47-year-old litigation attorney and private divorce strategist, who had worked with August Hartwell's legal office before his death, arrived within the hour in a dark coat and carrying a leather case and the expression of a woman who had read this variety of document before and was not impressed by it. She read the 4th page. She placed one finger on the lender clause. "This is not a divorce settlement," Camille said. "It is a confession formatted as paperwork." Elowen picked up her father's silver fountain pen from the desk. He had given it to her the year she formally joined the Hartwell Capital Trusts Board. "They want me to sign before I understand what they are hiding." "Then we do not sign." Camille opened her notepad. "Tell me everything." When Elowen finished explaining the Hartwell Capital Trust, the Westmark capital structure, and the premarital disclosure schedule Cormac had signed without reading, Camille sat quiet for several seconds. "Does he know?" she said finally. "He knows my father founded Westmark. He believes operating control passed to outside managers after my father died." "Did it?" "No." Elowen looked at her tablet screen. "My father made sure it was protected from people who would use it before they understood what it was for." Camille set down her pen. "Then we do this properly." Elowen called Adele and asked that Westmark's legal team and compliance officers join a secure line. Within 20 minutes, the hotel room contained 3 voices and one clear directive. "I am still legally married to Cormac Delvine," Elowen said. "I will not use my position to punish him personally. I will not vote on the company's credit review. Every decision Westmark makes on the Delvine and Ashford file must come through the Independent Risk Committee and outside counsel, not from me. The record must be clean." Adele said, "Understood. We treat this as a conflict-screened borrower review." Camille gave Elowen one brief look across the desk. Silence was only weakness when there was no room willing to listen. The moment had come to let the record do the listening. The mediation room 3 days later was bright and impersonal and entirely inadequate for what was about to take place inside it. Cormac arrived with Reeve and his solicitor. Honora sat beside him. Sabine came last, wearing earrings Elowen recognized from the jewelry case in the Thornfield master bedroom, gold with a diamond edge. She had no legal reason to be in a divorce mediation between a husband and wife. Cormac had brought her because he still believed Elowen's pain was a useful instrument. The mediator, Holbrook Sennett, 61, a retired family court arbitrator, looked tired before anyone opened a folder. Camille set 3 tabbed documents in front of Elowen and said quietly, "Let them deny first." Cormac leaned back in his chair. "Elowen, this is embarrassing for everyone." Camille spoke before Elowen answered. "Mr. Delvine, did your wife ever contribute personal funds to support Thornfield House operations, staff salaries, or Delvine and Ashford's financial continuity during periods of reduced liquidity?" Cormac laughed once short. "No." Camille wrote it down. She turned to Honora. Same question. Honora said, "Elowen contributed social presence, nothing of material value." Camille wrote that down too. She turned to Reeve. "Were company funds used to cover personal expenses, housing, travel, clothing, personal styling, or gifts for individuals outside the formal employ of Delvine and Ashford?" Reeve's eyes moved once towards Sabine and back. "Absolutely not." Camille wrote it slowly. Sabine touched Cormac's wrist. "She is turning a personal matter into a business attack." Camille looked up from her notepad. "Mrs. Lott, the settlement your client submitted attempted to block my client from any inquiry into the company's lenders. The business dispute was already there. My client did not begin it." For the first time, Cormac did not have an immediate answer. He was still without one when Oswin arrived at Camille's office that evening, carrying a box of documents from the Thornfield archive room. 31 years. Oswin had spent 31 years managing that estate. He had watched Elowen organize supplier payments during a January when Cormac could not make payroll. He had watched her sit with municipal inspectors for 6 hours on a project permit while Cormac was traveling. He had kept every receipt she had asked him to file because he was the kind of man who believed that careful, quiet work deserved a paper record even when nobody else was looking. The box held ledgers with Elowen's handwriting in the margins, notes that read, "Covered through personal account, do not flag in company books." Receipts showing expenses Cormac had described as corporate settlements that were in fact personal charges routed through project accounts, and one handwritten memo clipped to a Westmark Capital renewal file, written in Honora's hand, "Keep Elowen away from the lender meetings." Short, deliberate, years of intention in one sentence. At Westmark Capital, Adele's risk team had spent 72 hours on the Delvine and Ashford file when they found the appraisals. The Haverford site valuations had been submitted twice, once in an earlier loan application and again in the current renewal package at a figure 14% higher, with a different appraisal date and an appraiser signature that did not match any registered firm. A second development property had been listed in 2 separate credit applications simultaneously. The same square footage pledged as collateral for 2 different obligations at once. The personal expense codes that Reeve had denied at mediation appeared clearly in the Westmark draw records. Wardrobe invoices submitted as photography costs, an apartment lease coded as a regional marketing suite, travel charges against site visits that no site records confirmed, a receipt for a pair of gold earrings described as client hospitality samples, connected to a corporate card registered to Sabine Lott's consulting arrangement. Adele documented everything and brought it to the compliance committee. She did not call Elowen to discuss the findings. She let the record do what records exist to do. The Westmark Capital boardroom had a long table, a view of the financial district, and a quality of morning light that made everything inside it feel like it mattered. Cormac walked in expecting to negotiate. He was 30 minutes late because Honora had insisted on accompanying him and needed time with her coat. Reeve was already seated at the table, looking at the surface of it. Thaddeus Norris, 60-year-old Delvine, an Ashford board member and old family acquaintance, stood near the window holding a coffee he was not drinking. Honora smoothed her jacket. "Westmark has always valued the Delvine relationship," she said to the room. "That won't have changed." The boardroom door opened. Elowen walked in. She wore a charcoal blazer. Her father's silver pen was in the inside pocket. She carried no explanations. She sat at the head of the table. Every Westmark executive stood. Adele said, "Good morning, Miss Hartwell." Cormac's hand, which had been moving toward the water pitcher, went entirely still. Honora stared at Elowen the way a person stares at something that has stopped obeying the rules they believed were permanent. Reeve closed his eyes. Adele continued for the official record. Elowen Hartwell Delvine is the controlling beneficiary of Hartwell Capital Trust, which holds majority voting interest in Westmark Capital Inc. Due to documents submitted by the borrower which bear her name and raise questions of consent, her presence is required for identity verification and conflict disclosure. Credit and risk decisions in this review will be led by the independent committee, outside legal counsel, and the compliance record. Everard, Westmark's outside compliance attorney, opened the first binder. Cormac found his voice. "Elowen, what is this?" She did not answer the way a wife answers a question at a hall table. She looked at the file in front of her. "It is the file you told me I would not understand," she said. The review was not long. Covenant breach, inflated appraisals, duplicate collateral pledges, personal expenses drawn through company accounts, personal guarantee renewal bearing Elowen's name that she had never signed, a document whose H in Hartwell crossed in the wrong direction, pressure inconsistent with her actual hand, confirmed by a forensic document examiner retained by outside counsel. Honora said, "She is doing this out of spite." Elowen looked at her. She had been waiting, in some quiet interior room of herself, to know what she would say when this moment finally arrived. When it came, the words were simpler than she had expected. "I gave this family 10 years to show me who it was before it knew what I owned." Honora opened her mouth. She did not have an answer for that. Cormac leaned forward. His voice went soft in the way voices go soft when they are trying to sound like intimacy instead of desperation. "Elowen, this is our marriage. Don't let paperwork speak for us." She looked at him directly. "You filed for divorce in a room where your mistress was wearing my earrings." The boardroom went silent. Adele read the committee recommendations into the record. Discretionary credit access frozen. Emergency refinancing denied. Default proceedings to begin on overextended obligations. Questioned documents referred for legal review. Estate-backed collateral to be assessed under recovery protocol. Personal guarantees under examination for accuracy and valid consent. Cormac stood. If you freeze the lines, we lose everything. Elowen's voice stayed even. Then the loss was already there. I was simply the reason it had not arrived yet. She picked up her father's pen and signed the conflict disclosure. The form that said she had declared her position, recused herself from the vote, and left every decision to the record. Cormac watched her hand move. Then Reeve stood. I want to speak with counsel, separately from the company. Cormac snapped. Reeve, sit down. Reeve looked at Elowen. He looked at the binders. He looked at Honora. I will cooperate with the review. Fully. Honora's voice became something cold and small. You are embarrassing yourself. Reeve answered quietly. I am embarrassing myself considerably less than I would in 6 months if I said nothing now. The collapse of Delvine and Ashford Development Group took 11 weeks to become official and a decade of mismanagement to become inevitable. The credit freeze at Westmark triggered a cross-default clause with a secondary lender. Investors requested emergency financial disclosure packages and did not appreciate what those packages disclosed. Subcontractors who had been patient stopped being patient and started filing liens. The company's application for a major municipal contract was withdrawn when the procurement office received notice of the pending fraud referral. Cormac's personal guarantees exposed most of what remained of his private holdings. The vehicles, the memberships, the property in Prince Edward County listed under a numbered company. All of it entered the review. Sabine's consulting arrangement ended the morning the expense audit became a formal inquiry. Her corporate card was cancelled before noon. By afternoon, she had received a legal notice requiring her to preserve and return company-funded property, including jewelry itemized in the corporate hospitality records. The earrings came back in a padded evidence envelope. Not a crown, not a prize, property connected to a ledger line. Honora received formal notice from the court-appointed receiver managing the estate-backed collateral, Thornfield House. The house she had held over Elowen, like a condition of belonging, was placed under partial receivership pending resolution of the secured debt claims. A stranger walked through the front hall with a clipboard. Melina called Elowen the morning it happened. Her voice was steady, and the words underneath it were not. Honora asked me to tell the receiver to leave, Melina said. I told her I couldn't do that. Thank you, Elowen said. She asked me which side I was on. A pause. I told her I was on the side of people who paid the staff on time. Another pause. She didn't have an answer for that either. Elowen did not celebrate any of it. She sat with Adele's team and reviewed the employee impact report, not the executive summary. The bottom rows, the site coordinators, the contracts administrators, the receptionist who had been with the company since before Cormac became CEO, people who had not inflated a valuation or coded a weekend retreat as a business expense, people who had come to work and trusted the name on the building. The employees who did not participate in the misconduct need a protected transition process, Elowen said, before anything else is resolved. Adele nodded. We can structure priority severance through the recovery proceedings. And the Hartwell Foundation has approved funding channels for workforce transition support, emergency household assistance, job placement. Elowen looked at the list of names. Nobody who filed permits and answered phones should lose their January rent because of what someone else decided in a boardroom. No press release, no photograph. She arranged the fund and let Adele's office handle the communications. That was how her father had taught her that real help worked. It did not require an audience. It required a clear commitment and someone who followed through. Cormac called Camille's office several times. On the 5th attempt, Camille permitted a brief exchange in a building lobby with security nearby. He looked smaller than Elowen remembered. Not the way tired people look smaller. The way certain men look smaller when the room they are standing in stops agreeing to make them large. You were my wife, he said. I was, she said. That was the first thing you spent. He stared at her as though that sentence had arrived from somewhere he had no map to, as if 10 years of sustained invisible labor had been so thoroughly invisible to him that its withdrawal was still landing in pieces. You could have told me, he said finally, about the trust, about Westmark. She thought about the night before their wedding. They had been sitting on the back step of her apartment, and he had been talking about the future in the optimistic, slightly careless way that had seemed so full of life to her then. She had started to explain the Hartwell structure, and he had laughed and said, Don't let your father's accountants frighten you out of enjoying your life. She had stopped. Not because she was afraid, because something in his voice told her that her ownership of anything would only ever be interesting to him in relation to what it could do for him. I waited, she told him now in the lobby, until I could see what you loved when you thought I had nothing. He did not speak after that. On a Thursday evening in November, Elowen returned to the Westmark Capital offices after hours. The building was quiet. The city below the windows was lit and going about its ordinary business. Adele met her at the boardroom door. Final Recovery Committee vote confirmed this afternoon, Adele said. The Hartwell Foundation disbursements have cleared. Nessa Arlo found a new position through the transition program. Oswin received his settlement and the letter of commendation you wrote. Elowen nodded. And Melina? Retired. Full back pay from estate accounts. She said to tell you she left a key in the east cupboard where you would know to find it. Elowen walked into the empty boardroom alone. The long table, the chairs, the view of the city that her father had looked at from this room when he was still alive, and deciding what kind of institution Westmark would be and what it was built to protect. She placed his silver pen on the table. For years she had believed that love meant holding things together for people who would not hold themselves together. She had believed that being needed was close enough to being valued. She had believed that patience was a form of protection. She understood now that patience was only power if you were eventually willing to use it. She had used it. The Hartwell Capital Trust had not been her inheritance. It had been her father's lesson about the difference between people who respect money and people who respect you. He had built the trust before her marriage because he had wanted her to have the choice he had been watching women not get for his entire career, the choice to know what you own before you decide who deserves to know it too. Elowen looked at the chair at the head of the table. Not the one Sabine had taken at the investor dinner, not the one Honora had moved near the kitchen passage, not the chair that Cormac had assumed she would vacate quietly, like a room being cleared for someone with more obvious ambition. This chair had her name on the trust document that governed the institution around it. She sat down. She picked up her father's pen. She turned off the boardroom light. She walked out into the hall and into the elevator and out through the lobby into the cold Toronto night, with the particular steadiness of a woman who has nothing left to prove and a very clear sense of what she wants to build next. Some women do not become powerful after betrayal. Some women were powerful the whole time, and the betrayal was only the moment everyone else was finally required to look. Subscribe to Broken Pledge Tales and comment strength if you believe that silence was never weakness. It was always strategy.